Greetings and thank you for tuning in to Mr. Story Channel, where you can experience the most fascinating moments on Reddit. It's time for our first story. Am I the jerk for telling my parents that being better parents to their younger children does not make up anything to me? My parents had me when they were still pretty young, both 21. They weren't really secure and didn't have a maternal or paternal instinct back then. Because of this, my dad's parents stepped up, and they would take care of me when my parents were busy with school, work, or anything really. I was basically raised by my grandparents for 13 years, and when I was 13, it only stopped because my life got busier with the encouragement of my grandparents. I was in extracurriculars, paid for by my grandparents, and spending more time with friends and exploring the world. My grandparents taught me a lot of skills, from cooking and cleaning to how to take care of myself. They did it because they were aware I might not get taken care of if something happened to them, and I was left with just my parents. For years, my parents resented me. I know it, they know it, and my grandparents know it. They showed it in smaller ways. Complaining when I asked for their signature, or when my grandparents told them they needed to show up at parent conferences at my school. They would grumble about me being sick and ask my grandparents to deal with it. Sometimes they would take me to an amusement park and get annoyed when they couldn't go on all the rides together because that meant leaving me alone. Sometimes my grandparents had plans and couldn't let me stay with them for a night, and my parents wanted to go out. Then they had more kids who are 3 and 1 now, and they are way better parents to them. I'm not saying they're perfect, because nobody is, but they are being parents to them. They deal with every tantrum without acting like they hate the baby. They play with them, read bedtime stories, sing with them, and fight over who stays home with a sick kid because both want to be there. They know their 3-year-old's favorite foods and music. They want these kids. It only came to my attention recently because my parents suddenly decided the three of us needed therapy. They felt that being better parents to their younger children meant I would forgive them, and it would make it up to me for not being there for me, even though they still aren't. They talked about me being distant, not spending time with the family, and how they don't know me. I told them, of course, they don't because they were never around me, and when they were, they wished I wasn't there. I told them they couldn't honestly expect that being better parents to their other kids would make it up to me. They mentioned something about siblings and how I speak like they're not, and I said because my parents are my dad's parents, not them, and the kids I live with have different parents than me and a very different life. I also reiterated that being better to them is good because no kid should go through what I did, but it doesn't make anything up to me. They told me it was spiteful to not take joy in my siblings having better, and they accused me of being stubborn and unforgiving. So, am I the jerk? How do you think OP should deal with his parents in this situation? Tell me in the comments. If you are enjoying these stories, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel. This helps a lot. Thanks. Next story. Am I the jerk for kicking out my sister for asking my husband to father her kids? My husband Dan, 40 male, and I, 36 female, had my sister Morgan, 33 female, and her wife Chris, 35 female, along with my parents, 2 sets of aunts and uncles, and a few cousins over for family dinner during Easter. Morgan and Chris have been married for several years and have been on a fertility journey to start a family. During childhood, Morgan and I always role-played as mothers, and I know that, like me, she's always wanted to have kids. She and Chris are great with my sons, and I know they'd make excellent parents. I know they've been talking about taking steps to become parents, and so when they said they had an announcement over dinner, I was very excited, hoping to hear I was becoming an aunt. I almost cried when my sister announced they'd found a sperm donor. I thought that meant they'd found a donor through their IVF clinic. Everyone was ecstatic, and we all started asking about the donor's traits and what they liked about his profile, trying to get a feel for what my new little niece or nephew might be like. They started to get cagey and avoid eye contact, saying we misunderstood them. They hadn't found a donor through IVF. They were trying to tell us who they'd decided on, Dan, my husband. Dan and I were both confused. Apparently, they hadn't bothered to fill Dan in on this plan, so he was just as taken aback as I was. Apparently, my children are so cute that they wanted their own version. Literally. They think that Dan plus my sister's DNA would make pretty much the same kid, except this time, Chris told me that she just knows it will be a girl, which, IMO, are insane things to say. I looked around the room, and everyone was just silent and awkward. Dan asked them if they were serious or if it was some weird joke, but they were adamant that they meant it. I told them they were sick in the head. Morgan called me a homophobic witch, and I kicked them out of my house for insulting my husband, children, and marriage with their little stunt. Dinner fizzled out pretty quickly, and everyone just kind of awkwardly left. After that, Morgan, Chris, Dan, and I were just in some sort of state of shock. After I calmed down a bit, I sent Morgan a text saying that it was sick to ask my husband to father her child, and that it was gross to consider her having my children's biological siblings, and if she can't see that, she should lose my number. Dan also sent them a message saying that in no uncertain terms would he ever consider being their sperm donor, and was upset they had raised it at a family dinner rather than approach the two of us privately if they wanted him to donate. I've been bombarded with messages from family and some friends saying I completely overreacted and that I'm being unreasonable, homophobic, and controlling. The overwhelming consensus from everyone is that I'm overreacting. But these are all people who've been on this fertility journey with Morgan and Chris for a few years now, so they have a vested interest. I want an unbiased opinion. Am I the jerk for reacting the way I did? Let's see some comments. Not the jerk. I'm a bit exhausted right now, so if this is scattered, sorry. What the heck? Who, 1, presumes that someone will just be a donor without asking? 2, does someone call someone homophobic for saying no to being pressured? NGL, the fact they did this at Easter in front of everyone to try to pressure you both feels a bit calculated, especially with the reaction to the no being something to make you look even worse than you are being. I.e., because you and your husband don't want to have your sister have weird genetic half-siblings or cousins after being peer pressured. You're the worst possible thing they can accuse you of without proof. Do Morgan or Chris have a history of doing anything manipulative or weird like this? Maybe they like trying to upstage you at events? Also, not to mention, in 15 to 20 years when these kids understand, just what the heck would they think? Because even if they try to hide it, a single 23andMe or Ancestry test will break down any story they have. You and your husband need to hold firm and also point out some of these things. It's not homophobic to not want to share your husband's genetics with your sister. Next story. Am I the jerk for missing my niece's 18th birthday because my children are the only ones excluded? My sister doesn't particularly like 2 of my children. They are 8 and 10, have autism, and are high energy, but they are great kids. I don't just say that because they are mine. They are exceptional students, excel in their musical and sports hobbies, and are well-liked by everyone. No one else in the family has an issue with them, and we recently attended a formal sit-down dinner and dance for my grandmother's 80th birthday with 0 issues. When they were younger, I refused to set them up for failure and avoided fancy restaurants or other places not appropriate for high-energy kids. So we did miss my sister's 40th birthday, as I had recently separated from my husband, had a newborn via cesarean, and wasn't sure that I could cope with the kids in that setting, but I was relying on others to drive us there, so I couldn't just leave if needed. Plus, it was a per-head buffet and would have been a waste to leave before eating. I believe she is still salty about that, 6 years later. There will be other children at this party, around 20 of them, ranging from 11 down to newborns. My nieces invited me, and then my sister changed dates, so it's no longer on my kid-free weekend. She then contacted me, saying, "You will have to get a babysitter for those 2. My other children are invited, 19/13/6 years old. They are hiring a hall, cooking a barbecue dinner, and having a local band play, so it's very family-friendly. I've booked a holiday overseas instead for myself and the kids, and we will be there instead. I'll send the girls some cash as presents, and they are both moving to the city where I now live for university next year. So I'll help them move and fill their pantries as a housewarming gift, which I did for my oldest child as well. Now my sister is complaining that I'm going on holiday rather than the party. So am I the jerk for not taking some of my children to the party and getting a babysitter for 2 of them? Edit to clarify. When they were younger, they struggled to sit still in a noisy public setting for longer than about an hour. They would eat and then do coloring, Lego, or puzzles, whatever I'd packed, until I finished eating. Then I would take them for a walk outside, with my now ex-husband or my parents taking turns to walk with them outside. Pretty age-appropriate for a 2 and 4, but my nieces who are older would sit for hours with their iPads while my sister chatted in a cafe. Now they still need a decent amount of physical activity. It's 2 p.m. here, and they have been on the trampoline, riding scooters in the driveway with my youngest niece. We are at my younger sister's house and playing some basketball in the backyard. I could give them screens, but they struggle to sleep if they sit around too long, and I prefer to interact and socialize during meals. Next story. Am I the jerk for not letting my sister know the name chosen for my baby? I'm 38 years old and pregnant with my first, and probably only, child. My sister, 36 female, is also pregnant, but this is her third child, and this baby comes several years after her last child, who was 8 years old. I struggled with fertility problems for many years. I could not get pregnant despite trying at the age of 24. We underwent numerous tests, but no clear reason for this was ever found. We tried taking breaks between trying. We tried fertility medications in recent years, and finally, last year, we went through IVF, which was successful for us. You might wonder what this has to do with the name of my baby. Well, let me explain. My husband and I had a boy and a girl name chosen pretty much from the time we started trying for a baby. These were names we promised to use whenever we had a baby, and we had planned to have at least 2 children. Those names stayed the names throughout everything. But when my sister was pregnant with her first child, she and her husband struggled to agree on a name. She mentioned mine and my husband's chosen names once during my pregnancy and said how lucky we were to have agreed. Then, when her daughter was born, she decided to use the girl name my husband and I had chosen. And she confessed that is how the name was decided. She said her husband liked our chosen name, and she didn't think it was bad, so she decided it would be better for them to use it so their baby could have a name. She told me not to look upset because, admittedly, I got emotional when she said this and told me at least the name would be used. Then, when her son was born, she used the name we had chosen for the same reason. They couldn't agree on another name. This did strain our relationship, and I was and still am hurt that she was so dismissive of my feelings and so blunt about what they did. She implied pretty strongly that she expected I would never have children to use the name for. Then, a couple of years after her son was born, she made the comment that we agreed so easily that we could find another name if it worked, implying that we could not or should not use the names anymore. We ended up mixing our boy choice and our girl choice for this baby. Both had a unisex name in them, and we decided, since we loved all 4 names, mixing them wasn't a huge change. My sister won't like this, but honestly, we don't see each other much anymore. She only reached out more now because we're both pregnant at the same time, and she has asked repeatedly about the name we have chosen. I have refused to tell her, but my 2 brothers know. They thought I should have used the original name as intended and given our sister the middle finger. But they also understand why we chose to mix them. She sent me a very pissy text a few nights ago saying I'm being so petty and these babies should grow up close together and we should be working on our relationship, but instead I am excluding her and making a point of saying I don't want her to know anything. So, am I in the wrong to keep it a secret? Next story. I got annoyed at my boyfriend for wanting to split the bill. My boyfriend, 30 male, and I, 22 female, are in a long-distance relationship, and he visited my country for a week and a half for Easter break. We usually take turns paying for the bill depending on where we go, but I have noticed that I end up paying a lot more than he does. Whenever it is my turn to pay, he will order a lot more food than usual. For example, 2 days ago we went to an Italian restaurant, and I told him I'd pay for dinner since he paid for lunch. He ordered $90 worth of food just for himself, while I only ordered 1 dish. This has happened a lot, where he will order multiple items off the menu while I only order one thing and I end up paying. I never complain and always pay anyway, since I offer to pay beforehand. Yesterday we went to a museum, and my boyfriend wanted to go to an exhibit that had an entry fee of $80 per person. When we got to the counter, he asked me if I wanted to split the bill, and before I could say anything, the man working behind the counter stared at my boyfriend and told him, "No, you will be paying. Don't treat your girlfriend that way," and rolled his eyes at my boyfriend. The worker seemed very pissed off about it. My boyfriend mumbled something and paid for my entry fee. When we were out of earshot, he said to me that I could just transfer him the money for my ticket later. I'm not really sure why, but this offended me. We usually take turns paying, so I'm not sure why it did, but for some reason it upset me a little. I also don't have a job at the moment, and I am living with my grandparents after being homeless for a few weeks. I was recently discharged from the military and am on a veteran pension while I'm at university, while my boyfriend, on the other hand, is a lieutenant and on a good salary. Do I have a right to be annoyed about this? I'm usually okay with paying for myself, but for some reason this incident at the museum offended me. Next story. I discovered something about my wife's recent past that changed the way I see her. I discovered something about my wife's past 1 week after we got married, and I don't know what to do. It seems like she had a very wild past with a guy I thought was in a holy. I'm a bit drunk, so this might be a bit of a ramble. I am currently with my 33 male wife, 32 female, and her parents before we head off to our honeymoon in 2 days. This happened a few days ago, but my fiancée and I got married last week. She is the love of my life, and I've never been happier. A couple of days after the wedding, she posted some pictures of us on Instagram, and I saw a reply to her messages from a familiar, unique name. Let's call him Omar since I remember he was Arab. Just a bit of background. My wife and I hit a rough patch roughly 4 years ago. During that little break, I know she slept with someone, and she knows that I also slept with someone. We are at peace with both of these decisions. That Omar guy at a party we'd been to was very flirty with my wife, my girlfriend back then, but in a bit of an unholy way. I remember that I didn't like him. To be fair to him, he didn't know we were together, but he was also flirting with a couple of other girls. What really shocked me was how drawn to him my wife was. She talked to him a lot, and he tried asking her to dance with him a few times. She kept making up excuses but didn't really say she was with someone. That hurt me a bit, but a break's a break. Just that she didn't feel like dancing. He then started dancing with this other girl who was good-looking, and I remember my wife staring at them so much with a panic look in her eyes. As a background, I come from a relatively conservative background, and so does my wife. I'm from India, and she's from a European country, Mediterranean. The reason for the rough patch was that we both studied together at a university in a European country. We dated for about 5 years, but I had problems with jobs and staying in that country. I suggested we get married as it's something we discussed already and it would help me, visa-wise. Initially, she seemed convinced, but I believe that some of her friends told her it's a huge responsibility. I hated that she listened to them, and that was the start of the break. A year later, we started messaging and seeing each other again, and we have been together since then, stronger than ever. The wedding was the happiest day of my life. I did something I'm really ashamed of doing. I looked through my wife's messages with this Omar, and now I can't sleep. She never ever cheated on me with him, and I always had a feeling he was the guy she slept with when we were apart. All he sent her was a congratulations, nothing flirty or suspicious. It appears even he's married now. I was also okay with him being the guy, but scrolling back to their messages from a few years ago, I saw a side to my wife I never imagined. She was absolutely desperate for him, even though she played hard to get with him. It was obvious he was going to sleep with her. For comparison, it took me a few months of courting my wife before we did anything physical. He wasn't a shy person, but he was clear to her that he only wanted intimacy. He barely replied to her messages, and the worst part is that she texted him on a weekly basis during that year to meet up. He only had intimacy with her 3 times, because that's when he felt like it. She also texted him a few times while she was in the mood, and they talked about what they did together. He asked her if she liked it when he made her taste herself. He called her a good girl. There were a lot of worse and obscene things, but it felt like this guy unleashed all his dirty fantasies on my wife. The first time they slept together, he was out at a party, and my wife texted him between 8 p.m. and 1 a.m. to see if he was available for a chat. Eventually, at 1 a.m., he texted her to come over to his place. She left some friends she was out with and Ubered there. I know they slept together that night because when he texted her the next day, she said she couldn't wait to see him again, but that she felt that he didn't cuddle enough with her after what they did. There was another time where she told him he made her feel good multiple times. This hurt more than anything else because I know my wife can't cope without toys, and that she must be lying to him to stroke his ego. Somehow, this was worse. I know they also had intimacy in public places. I had bought her a remote-controlled vibrator once to bring us closer together while I was back home for 2 months. He apparently asked her to wear it while they were out and controlled it while they were with his friends. We have a very intimate life, and I've always assumed we were both happy with this, but reading all these details just made me want to puke. I'm ashamed that this is making me feel like she's different. We weren't together, and it was her right to do all of this. I just can't believe that this person, who I saw as a queen, was being treated like this by someone else. One night, we got drunk together quite heavily and had intimacy. I remember she asked me to squeeze her neck and slap her lightly. She also asked me if I wanted her to call me daddy. That took me by surprise, to be fair, and made things a bit awkward the next day. I feel that maybe she wants these things but is ashamed of them with me. What the duck do I do? Do I talk to her? Do I try and get over it? How can I somehow unsee this? I've spent the past hour while my wife is out stalking this Omar guy. I feel like I'm going crazy. Edit. Wow, walk up to a lot of messages. I guess there are a few things to clarify here. When mentioned orgasming by toys, we do this thing together. It's not like I leave her without cuddling and she does this on her own. She's definitely not seeing this guy anymore, and they only say hello once a year to each other. My main sadness comes from two things. Obviously, the sexual things they explored, but also how she was drawn to him. I also read some of the things they talked about outside of intimacy. She sent him questions about his country of origin and tried to learn something to say in his language. I asked him so much about where he was going. He even took her to a party once and introduced her to a girl he used to duck. She sent him a very long message, saying she felt like the girl didn't like her and that she hoped he didn't go to her place after the party. He even texted her twice over the year, telling her he felt she was getting attached and reminding her he just wanted intimacy. She said, yeah, of course that's what I want. But then she would send him paragraphs of messages explaining her feelings to him. Once after they had intimacy, she was a bit short with him, and he asked her if he was too rough this time. She texted back, saying that the intimacy was as amazing as always, but she really hated that he didn't cuddle her after. I guess I never got to experience all these wants from my wife. I don't think I'm the safe option, but I'm also not his dangerous option where she's willing to do anything for me. I'm at lost. Any advice is welcome. Thanks. This op is in a very difficult situation. What would you do in his place? Tell me in the comments below. Hey everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in and watching until the end. Your support means the world to me. If you enjoyed what you saw and want to stay updated on future content, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. By subscribing, you'll be the first to know when I release new videos, and you'll be helping to support my channel. So, go ahead and click that subscribe button, and let's keep this journey going together. Thanks again for your support.